Gerald and Alice Uden weren't each other's first loves. In fact, they were far from it. Both of them had been married before they met, and both of them had a secret. In 1974, Alice Uden was a mother married to a man named Ronald Holtz, but less than a year and a half later, Alice filed for divorce. Only problem was, Holtz was nowhere to be found. In 1980, Gerald Uden was married and a stepfather to 2 sons, until one day both his wife and her sons mysteriously vanished. When Gerald and Alice met, they fell in love and started a life together. They went to church and engaged in pleasant conversations with their neighbors, one of which was quoted saying, "They're the kind of neighbors you leaned over the fence and talked about your chickens with." They were, as far as anyone knew, the definition of the wholesome old couple next door. But all of that changed when the pair entered their 70s. It was then that Alice's son Todd told police that his mother had once admitted to killing his father, her husband, and hiding the body in a gold mine. After the shocking revelation about Alice came out, police decided to begin looking into Gerald's past, which is when they found out that the pair had way more in common than previously thought. Gerald confessed to killing his ex-wife and her 2 sons with a hunting weapon she had actually gotten him as a present. Gerald was charged with killing in the first degree, and Alice, who claimed to have killed her husband in an act of self-defense, was charged with man 1.
Joseph Terracone was a man from the US who, in the 80s, was involved in a truly horrifying family scandal that went under the radar for decades. Joseph Terracone was a man from the US who in the late 70s was involved in a truly horrifying family scandal that went under the radar for decades. Terracone disappeared in 1978 after visiting his daughter in Hawaii. For nearly 30 years, no one knew what happened to him. His entire family was left completely in the dark. But the truth was finally uncovered in 2007. Terracone had been in a relationship with a woman named Renee Curtis at the time of his disappearance. When the relationship started to sour, Curtis and her brother Nicholas Notaro decided to get rid of him. Notaro fired at Terracone twice in the head. To cover up the crime, he and Curtis dismembered the body with a chainsaw and buried the remains. And the secret remained buried until construction workers discovered the body parts while demolishing Curtis's old house. Yeah, for some reason they figured home would be the best place to keep a dead body. Notaro admitted to the killing and was sentenced to life in prison. Curtis also confessed to helping dispose of the body, but denied having any involvement in planning the crime. Despite her claims though, she was also given a full life sentence.
In 1983, UK dentist Colin Howell and housewife Hazel Stewart were madly in love. Only problem was they were married and not to each other. After a while of hiding their affair and many repeated attempts at reconciling their own respective marriages, the two came up with a plan: to kill their current spouses and run away together. In 1991, Colin Howell poisoned his wife to death with carbon monoxide before arriving at his mistress, Hazel Stewart's house. In 1991, Colin Howell poisoned his wife to death with carbon monoxide before arriving at his mistress, Hazel Stewart's house, his wife's body in hand. When Colin arrived, Stewart set her half of the plan into action and did the same thing to her husband Howell had done to his wife. After both of their prospective spouses were dead, Howell and Stewart staged a scene. They propped both of the bodies up in a car in Stewart's garage to make it seem as though the pair had taken their own lives. And after all that, Howell and Stewart went their separate ways. Colin Howell eventually remarried and for a while lived a relatively normal life until one day he confessed his crime to his new wife. At first, she urged him to keep quiet for the sake of their family, but eventually, after Howell fell into some financial troubles and began cheating again, his wife changed her mind and ultimately turned Howell into the police. He received a prison term of 21 years and his co-conspirator Hazel Stewart a minimum of 18 years behind bars. What's more of a haunted highway than Highway 666, the Devil's Highway? Highway 666, the 6th branch of the famous Route 66. It really doesn't get more never drive at 3 a.m. than this. Today, the highway is known as Highway 191. The name was changed due to the belief that the many accidents, apparitions, and creepy mishaps were caused by the highway having adorned the devil's number for so long. Unfortunately, however, changing the name has not changed the nature of the road, which remains haunted, dangerous, and and incredibly creepy to this day. Phantom trucks, ghostly passengers appearing in back seats, see-through hitchhikers in torn white gowns, and hellhounds ready to rip the rubber directly off of your tires are a common sight for those driving along the roadway at night. One woman recounted a drive she had taken along the highway with her husband, saying, "At first everything seemed normal. Her and her husband were the only ones on the road when all of a sudden a massive truck appeared out of nowhere that seemed as though it was headed straight for the pair, charging so fast towards them that sparks were flying from the wheels and flames were coming out of the smokestack. The pair pulled off the road and waited for the truck to pass, and when it did, it disappeared into the night." I'm gonna go ahead and say avoid this roadway at night if you and your tires, which like I said are subject to be ripped apart by literal hellhounds, want to make it to your destination in one piece.
There are plenty of haunted hotspots along Route 66, but one of the most famous is an abandoned truck stop in Villa Ridge, the Tri-County Truck Stop, which opened in 1971 and closed in 2006. Ever since its closing though, people have reported strange stuff going on at the site, and there have been plenty of paranormal investigations in the abandoned building. A team of paranormal investigators called the Paranormal Task Force investigated the site in 2006, and the guy leading the investigation, Greg Myers, said they experienced some pretty weird stuff. Almost as soon as they arrived, a coffee pot came flying off a shelf. It's a nice welcome. He also added, quote, "On the first night we were setting up a camera on the second floor. I was holding a door shut and something was trying to open it from the other side. We were actually fighting back and forth." Other investigators have spotted a man in red flannel in the bathroom vanishing as soon as he's spotted, and other objects like light bulbs being hurled. And people have also apparently seen orbs and spectral shapes floating through the building, some which have been caught on camera.
Dead Man's Curve, located in Claremont County in Ohio. The curve is a turning intersection, a dangerous one where Route 222 meets State Route 125, and it's also said to be the most haunted place in all of Ohio. Although there have been many deaths at the intersection, the majority of hauntings are attributed to 5 young men who were killed there on October 19th of 1969 after their 1968 Impala was hit head-on by a 1969 Roadrunner going more than 100 miles an hour. Since then, the curve has been haunted by the deceased young men who appear as faceless hitchhikers hoping to catch a ride from someone who can take them away from the place where they met their grisly end.
Next, we head to Rachel, Nevada with Route 375. This is a pretty notorious stretch of road, known for its supposed extraterrestrial activity. So much so that it's been nicknamed the Extraterrestrial Highway. UFO fanatics from all of the world flock here year after year, hoping to catch an unidentified object in the sky or hopefully find some clue as to what's really going on in Area 51. Driving along this road, you'll get closer to the place than you'd probably ever hope. Now, aside from Area 51 though, there are other interesting spots along the route. There are old atomic bomb sites, lots of other military facilities, and on top of all the alien stuff, there's said to be plenty of paranormal weirdness, vanishing apparitions along the road, phantom headlights, and for everyone with a clown phobia, you may want to make sure you plan your route so that you don't end up having to spend a night at the Clown Motel, which is exactly what it sounds like. A clown-themed motel filled with ceramic clown dolls, puppets, life-size statues, you name it. Definitely where I'd be wanting to spend the night, but maybe not for everybody.
Highway 5, located in Lynn, Alabama. It was what was once a normal highway became a hotbed for paranormal activity after a young woman was killed one night in the late 20th century. A young woman and her boyfriend had been making their way home from prom when the pair got into a vicious fight. Not being able to bear another moment spent arguing with her partner, the woman decided to exit the vehicle, and in a fit of anger, her boyfriend drove off, leaving her all alone in the middle of the night on an empty highway with no shelter, sidewalks, or anyone to help for miles around. She was was determined though, and so she began walking along the highway in hopes of making it home by sunrise. Unfortunately, however, she was struck by a truck in a hit and run and left to spend the rest of the night dying a slow, painful death in a ditch next to the road. Her body was discovered the next morning, and her spirit has been there ever since. She's been seen walking along the highway aimlessly in the hopes of one day being able to finally make it back home to her family. Those who see her on the road and stop for help are greeted with a pretty creepy sight of a woman mangled and distressed who disappears when they finally get close enough to speak to her.
And we're starting off with the abandoned amusement park. It kind of wasn't even abandoned, to be honest. It was set to open just days after the disaster, so it was never actually used. The rusted Ferris wheel and desolate bumper cars still stand though. It's definitely eerie but somber too, an area frozen in time, a reminder of what could have been. The park, meant to be a source of entertainment for the residents of Pripyat and the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, now stands as a testament to the sudden and irreversible changes brought about by the events of that fateful day. The centerpiece of the park is the rusted Ferris wheel, which was meant to offer a nice panoramic view of the city, and surrounding it are the remains of bumper cars, a once colorful carousel, and the other amusement rides, all now deteriorating and covered in a layer of rust. And instead of the screams of happy visitors, there's just an eerie silence. Empty benches and picnic tables where families were meant to gather, completely desolate. Nature slowly reclaiming its territory has overgrown pathways and cracked the pavement, creating this sad, kind of post-apocalyptic ambience. If you are enjoying our channel, by the way, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We got videos coming at you on the daily. Number 9, the reactor control room. So deep within the bowels of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, the reactor 4 control room still stands, a relic frozen in time. This once bustling control center was the nerve center where decisions and actions were taken on that night in 1986. It's said that as you step into the room, the air is heavy. The dust-covered dials and cracked screens are a reminder of the frantic attempts to bring the situation under control. The red radiation warning lights, frozen at levels that spell out the magnitude of the disaster. In the dim light, you can almost imagine the hum of machinery, the hurried footsteps, the urgent conversations that once filled the room, a complete contrast to the lifeless, ghostly atmosphere that it has now. Prat Hospital. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why the place is unsettling. Hospitals are depressing, even when fully open and operational. Abandoned hospitals are that. Plus they have the creep factor of being empty and abandoned. So an abandoned hospital in the middle of a radioactive death zone, that's pretty much the apex of nightmarish hospitals right there. Looking at images of this place online, it looks like the real life Silent Hill or something. Chipped paint, rusted beds, the building is literally falling apart and decaying. Really oozes with ambience, just not the kind of ambience you want to sit back and relax in. And at number 7, we have the Blackbird of Chernobyl. In the months preceding the catastrophic events of April 26, 1986, residents near the Chernobyl nuclear power plant reported encountering a grotesque creature, a mutated figure with gigantic wings and deep red eyes. Nightmares and direct confrontations with this winged anomaly, later dubbed the Blackbird of Chernobyl, haunted a number of residents of the area. And then there was the devastating explosion of Reactor 4 at 1:23 a.m. The ensuing fire and nuclear meltdown led to the evacuation of over 336,000 people, and the story goes that several survivors of this incident were counted witnessing a colossal blackbird with a 20-foot wingspan soaring through the sky. Even if you've never heard of this particular part of the Chernobyl lore, this story probably sounds kind of familiar. It's very similar to the Mothman sightings in West Virginia right before the Silver Bridge collapse in 1968. The physical description of the creature is similar, and the fact that these creatures were reported appearing right before disasters, both the Blackbird of Chernobyl and the Mothman vanished after each of these catastrophes. See, I can't help but wonder if these ominous creatures are bound to disaster, omens that materialize in the shadows preceding total destruction. Next on the list is the notorious Red Forest. So the Red Forest, named for the eerie reddish color assumed by the pine trees following the radioactive fallout, is a symbol of the environmental impact of the Chernobyl disaster. This dense woodland located near the nuclear power plant absorbed a significant amount of radioactive particles, resulting in the death of its vibrant flora. As you step into the Red Forest, the silence is apparently palpable. The once lush trees, now lifeless and devoid of foliage, stand as a testament to the irreversible consequences of the nuclear fallout. Scientists did this really interesting experiment here too, to see how messed up things really were. They filled bags with leaves from clean spots and left them in both normal and messed up areas. So surprise, surprise, leaves in the messed up spots didn't break down much, holding on to about 60% of their weight. This means the radiation messed with the nature's ability to decompose and replenish itself in the area. The leaves stayed dry and intact for almost a year. Sounds harmless, but dry leaves in a place that's prone to forest fires, it's a ticking time bomb. If a fire breaks out, it could spread radioactive stuff beyond the no-go zone. So not only is the radiation messing with the forest's ability to bounce back, but now there's a legit risk of radioactive fire spreading trouble even farther.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Death. This is said to be a lost episode of Barney and Friends that recently came to light on TikTok. Many users were claiming that they were now remembering this dark episode that they had watched many years ago, and people were claiming that this episode was so dark that it made them feel basically traumatized. While Barney and Friends usually had episodes that taught us the value of friendship and good relationships, this episode is said to have had a much darker tone and allegedly only aired one single time. The episode in question is said to have been called Death, and many people have claimed that when the theme music started to play, you could hear a sort of creepy whispering just behind the music. After this, everything seemed to return to normal until Barney awoke. When Barney spoke, it was both the sound of his normal giggly voice, but there was also something darker behind it, like another voice underneath that was darker and lower and just sinister sounding. Apparently, this is the episode where Barney said that he was going to teach about death. People on TikTok have said that the episode ends with Barney going on a rampage and killing all of his friends on set, and at the end he's still saying the classic "I love you, you love me" song, but just in a bit more of a screamy, demonic way than I think any of us are used to. So yeah, while I'm not entirely sure that this episode ever existed, if it did, I think it's probably for the best that it just stays lost. In our number 9 spot today, we have The End. This Barney story has one of the darkest endings I think of any episode on this list. Before the airing, this particular episode was marketed as an unreleased episode that would only be airing that night. Everyone gathered to watch this new, exciting episode, but for some reason when the episode started, something was off. As the music in the beginning started to play, it just wasn't quite right. Before long, the video started to cut in and out with whatever this tape was. Suddenly, in the Barney parts of the tape, Barney was alone, without anyone around. It was really hard to make out exactly what he was saying because the audio was so distorted, but the entire thing had a very chilling energy to it. As the video progresses, the clips get more and more choppy and cut in and out more, but we see Barney with something dangerous, preparing to do what some have described as harm himself. In all copies that exist of this lost episode, this is where they stop and the tape goes black. Many people believe this is because whoever created this dark episode cut the ending out to save us all from the horrors that the original tape held. In our number 8 spot today, we have Barney's Spooky Cemeteries stories. This story about a lost Barney episode was a story by The Shadow Reader, and basically it starts off when the creators of Barney decided one year to make a Halloween special. I personally love a good Halloween special, so that sounds great. Basically, the idea for it was to take 3 classic spooky tales and retell them, but give them a Barney spin. You know, make it a bit of a lighter story with some good lessons hidden inside. This episode ended up accidentally getting sent to a new animation studio instead of the one that they were meant to be sent to, but no one caught this mistake. This new animation studio was said to be quite a risque one that specialized in adult animation, and they had quite a crude sense of humor. Cut to the day that the episode airs. Well, this episode was cut 8 minutes into airing because what happened next was the retelling of tales, but it was even more horrific than the originals. It was gory, it was scary, and it was just awful. Of course, no one wanted to be culpable for how this episode somehow made it to air for the 8 minutes it did, so all copies were immediately deleted. It is said that, save for a few recorded versions of people who were ready to tape the Halloween special at home, the episode has been completely lost. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Barney Toy. This creepy Barney story starts off when there was a new product on the market. It was a toy version of Barney, but this toy had a special capability. It allowed viewers of the show who had the toy to participate, have a more visceral learning experience using the toy and certain episodes made for it. This all sounds fine and well and like a great new technology for fans of the show, until one person received their new Barney toy. Everything was going well with the new toy, they loved it, so much so that even when not watching the interactive episodes, they still got their Barney toy to watch the regular episodes alongside. One day, the dad in this situation was listening in from another room as they hung out and spoke to their Barney toy. It seemed very cute and sweet and so sincere, like they were actually talking to a real living thing, not a toy. That was until the dad felt like he could now hear a low, grumbling voice speaking back. Well, as it turns out, this Barney doll had some kind of a curse or a demon living inside of it, and when the dad noticed something wrong, of course, the evil entity tried to do everything it could to make sure that no one listens to him. From here, all hell breaks loose, and the entity in the doll ends up having control over the son, which leads to an exorcism being performed. A priest is called and thankfully able to rid the son of the entity, and placed it back in the toy, which is now said to be locked up and buried somewhere secret so that hopefully no one ever stumbles upon it. In our number 6 spot today, we have the day on set. This creepy legend starts off with someone taking note of how a lot of the friends that appear on the show, you only see them once or twice before they suddenly just disappear, never to be seen again. This person took note of this after they spent a day on set, as they were one of the lucky ones who was going to be one of the friends on the show, but after leaving that day, they definitely will never be returning. As soon as they got there, things just weren't as expected. There was a very heavy and dark energy in the air, and once they saw Barney, they felt like something cold was there, rather than a warm, welcoming person that they had expected. They began to rehearse for the day, and this is when they began to realize even more grim stuff around the set. There were dangerous tools left out in plain sight, way too close to everyone who was supposed to be getting ready to perform. They began to notice some red spots on some of the costumes, especially Barney's, and when they mentioned it, everyone in the costumes just eerily and blankly stared at them. This all made them feel extremely uneasy, and it led to them trying to find a way to go home early because they knew they just needed to leave. There were red flags everywhere. They explained to the crew that they suddenly weren't feeling well and that they think they needed to go home, and this is when all of the actors stood there, silently staring at them. They stood there unsure of what to do for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably about 30 seconds, and when no one moved or responded, they began to walk for the door. This is when all of the actors in costumes grabbed the tools laying around the set and suddenly started running towards them, trying to catch them before they could get out the door. They ran as fast as they could and luckily reached the door before any of the actors got to them, and were safe once they stepped outside. I mean, the costumed actors weren't going to burst out of the studio because they didn't want to get caught in their maniacal plans. In the end, it's safe to say that this person never watched another episode again, and they got their answer as to where all of the friends on the episodes go to.
Starting us off at number 10 is Dan Cooper. Back in 1971, a man who went by the alias Dan Cooper hijacked a commercial plane, and no one has ever been able to find him since. According to those involved, shortly after takeoff, he handed a note to a flight attendant claiming to have a his briefcase. He demanded 4 parachutes and $200,000 in $20 bills, which is the equivalent of like $1.2 million nowadays. Otherwise,
He was going to kill everyone on the plane. After the flight landed in Seattle, Cooper released the 36 passengers once authorities had provided him with the money and parachutes, but kept both pilots, one flight engineer, and flight attendants as hostages on the plane. From there, he forced them to fly to Mexico City, but somewhere over Nevada, Cooper jumped off the plane with the stolen cash. The FBI launched a massive search that is still considered one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations in FBI history. But Dan Cooper has yet to be found, and I'm sure many agents lost sleep over trying to figure out this case.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the vulnerability. According to Forbes, there was a company called Checkmarx who found quite the vulnerability a few years ago when it came to Alexa devices. Basically, the company works to test the security of different devices, and when they were running Alexa through the checks, they found something that might turn your assistant into a device that just listens to and records every single thing you say. Basically, Alexa has a function where it listens for follow-up commands from the user. What I mean by this is, should you set an alarm, Alexa might reply and ask you if you meant AM or PM, and it's during this sort of follow-up period where the vulnerability shows itself. The team was able to gain access quite easily by installing malicious code into what would seem like an innocent app. In this case, it was a calculator. After doing this in a normal Alexa, there would only be a certain list of phrases that would have the device listening for a follow-up question, but now with this malicious code, they found a way for Alexa to listen for the follow-up, but without any word, meaning they could essentially tap in anytime they wanted. Apparently the good news is that Amazon has fixed this in response to the hack. They said, quote, "Customer trust is important to us and we take security and privacy seriously. We have put mitigations in place for detecting this type of skill behavior," reported by Checkmarx. While it seems safe, hearing these sorts of possibilities does make you pretty nervous about what could be hiding behind your Alexa. In our number 9 spot today, we have the listeners. If you own an Alexa device, you can download this thing, and then once you have it, you can ask Alexa to ask the listeners, and something spooky happens. Amazon describes it as, quote, "an experiment in language art that provides, if you simply keep asking to continue, many fragments of both scripted and improvised speech in an intriguing, emergent narrative. You will never hear the listeners say exactly the same thing twice, but the listeners is not a chatbot or an AI. They are more of a drama or a simple game. Get started with Alexa, ask the listeners, and then continue. Go on. Or try something like, I am filled with joy. Or what are you feeling?" The listeners will suggest ways to transact with them. You might also want to ask them, "Let the other voices speak." What in the actual hell did I just read? That sounds absolutely frightening. And to be honest, all of the reviews on Amazon say the exact same thing. People who experienced it said it scared the heck out of them, so I think I'll take their word for it. In our number 8 spot today, we have the argument. There was a Reddit thread a few years ago that prompted the question, "What is your creepy Alexa story?" A user named Meat Macho replied to the thread, and they definitely delivered quite the story. Basically, they explained that one day they and their wife were having an argument. Of course, no one is having a good time, and it's definitely not a time to be playing tricks on each other, so neither of them could explain what happened next. They wrote, quote, "Wife and I were arguing about something, no clue what it was, but it was getting a little heated. I don't know what Alexa thought she heard, but she suddenly interjected with, 'Why don't we change the subject?' It was just so unexpected and relevant enough to be creepy. We both heard it, and we both still talk about it years later. There was nothing in the app logs. I guess Alexa isn't just a trusty assistant, she's also a marriage counselor. While she may have worked to possibly stop the fight between these two, I'm sure she also instilled a new fear that neither of them knew that they had before." In our number 7 spot today, we have Are You Recording Me? So we've all had to call into some sort of customer service line where we get the automated message, or the person on the other end tells us that the call may be recorded for quality assurance purposes or training or whatever it is. It's a law thing, they gotta let you know. In fact, if you ask Siri this question, "Are you recording me?" she'll get kinda confused and respond that she's unsure of what you mean, but she could do an internet search for you. Alexa, on the other hand, she's not so slick with her secrets, at least not in the past, because some users reported something creepy happening after asking Alexa the same question. Well, I'm sure all of the legalities to this one are located in the terms and conditions and all of that good stuff. It doesn't make it any less creepy that when some people ask Alexa if she was recording them, Alexa just didn't respond at all and suddenly shut off. She's just out here ignoring people. She's dodging questions, and that only makes me have more questions. I'm not even sure if this is enough to get me to read the terms and conditions though. It's the most often lie I've ever told. In our number 6 spot today we have the greetings. So apparently there are rumors that Alexa can speak to people that have already passed away. If that's really true, we don't talk about that enough. Of course, my brain was immediately skeptical upon hearing this information, but some people swear it's true. Apparently, if you ask Alexa to greet people, some have experienced her coming back to them with the name of a deceased loved one. Another person experienced their Alexa without being asked anything, and only when they turned on one specific light in the house would say hello and then the name of their grandmother who had passed 3 years prior. This person was incredibly confused and totally freaked out by this because it didn't just happen once, it happened multiple times. They explained that they also didn't have an Alexa during the time that she was alive, and that she also doesn't believe she ever spoke her grandmother's name out loud in front of the Alexa. Maybe this was just some weird coincidence, but it certainly sounds like Miss Alexa is giving off some major Ouija board vibes. In our number 5 spot today, we have the spy device. This crazy Alexa story is so freaky that I just had to share it with you guys. This story starts off in the midst of the storyteller's mom going through a divorce, which we all know can be a messy situation. So the ex-husband in this situation had apparently planted an insane amount of hidden cameras throughout the house that they had to search for to find once the pair had split up. There were entrances and exits, the living and dining room, the hallways, the bedroom, everywhere in the house was being monitored. Then they found out that he had bugged her laptop so as to be able to have remote access to it, and then when she took her car in for an oil change, the mechanic found a tracking device that had been placed on it. This was all found during the separation era, but once the divorce process actually started, things got even creepier. They wrote, quote, "Once the divorce started and he officially moved out, we scanned the entire house for bugs and didn't find anything. So we really freaked out when he started calling, texting, emailing her, complimenting her outfits, asking how her friends were as they were in the house, asking how her trip to the store was, and other really odd things he couldn't have known about. As it turns out, this guy somehow connected his phone to the Alexa dot beforehand, and he was now using it to record whoever was close enough to the Alexa to be picked up on the mic, and at this point he was still able to access the laptop and its camera." How absolutely horrifying is that? He was literally using the Alexa to spy on them. It's scary, it's disgusting, and it definitely makes you question every single person who might be connected to your devices. In our number 4 spot today, we have the spooky story. You can ask Alexa to tell you a scary story and she will happily oblige. There isn't really a catch with this one, to be perfectly honest. If you want a scary story, you'll receive one, so just make sure you're really ready and in the mood before asking your assistant for a fright. This can be an awesome tool for people looking for a spooky tale, for anyone in the home who needs some chilling entertainment, but beware, these stories can be a little too scary for some. There was a video posted to the internet in October of last year where some people at a sleepover asked Alexa to tell them a spooky Halloween tale, and things very quickly went awry. They were all way too terrified of the story Alexa told next and couldn't get the Alexa to stop. They were all sufficiently freaked out and reacted in a way that I know will be a core memory for the years to come, and they definitely learned not to ask Alexa this question. In our number 3 spot today, we have the local spots. This is a creepy story that took place back in 2018 and happened to the owner of an Amazon Echo, which of course features Alexa. Basically, this person explained that they had returned home one night and everything was fine. Nothing out of the ordinary happened at all, until, totally unprompted, their Alexa just started talking. This was definitely weird, but things turned super creepy when they realized what it was that their Alexa was saying. As it turns out, their Alexa, out of the blue, just started listing off local cemeteries and funeral homes to them. How eerie is that? This story was posted to Twitter by the user @HeyIt'sCamo, and they finished off their tweet by saying, quote, "I'd rather it laugh at me, TBH. Me too, Camo. Me too." Apparently their theory behind this one is that maybe their Alexa wants them dead because they play the same Spotify playlist over and over again. In our number 2 spot today, we have 20 questions. So I didn't know this, but apparently you can play 20 questions with Alexa, and she is also frighteningly good at it. A little too good sometimes, however, and that is exactly what prompted the Reddit user PelPel4 to ask the Reddit question, "What is your creepy Alexa story?" The user decided to ask the internet this question after a strange 20 questions with Alexa encounter that they and their wife had. They explained, quote, "My wife and I were playing 20 questions and, spoiler alert, our answer was pig. We got through until the end and Alexa guessed Basenji. Now, I don't know how many of you know what a Basenji is, but they're a very rare barkless dog and I happen to have one. We've bought some Basenji themed things off of Amazon before, so it's either that or she's listening. But I mean, come on, she didn't even say dog, straight to Basenji. Anyone else have similar stories? That would definitely be pretty unsettling, to say the least. Not that a pig and a dog are like the most unsimilar things, it's just how she was so specific with this breed. It must have been stored in there somewhere, right? In our number 1 spot today we have Don't Go. This creepy Alexa story comes from the Reddit user MyTieGuy72, and they said, quote, I got woken up at 4 a.m. this morning to Alexa repeating some incoherent phrase over and over. She was saying something like, don't go into the house, but I really couldn't fully understand it. It was sort of a mumble. By the time I came downstairs she had repeated it about 4 or 5 times. I listened 1 or 2 more times to try and figure out what the hell it was saying exactly, but never could. I just unplugged the damn thing and I have no plans of turning it back on. Is it just me or does that sound like Alexa was watching some kind of a horror movie? Like, don't go into the house. It's so terrifying, especially to hear in the middle of the night. I don't blame this person for unplugging the thing and leaving it somewhere to be forgotten about.
Moving on to number 2, Mark Putnam. In the mid-1980s, Mark Putnam was a happy husband, father, and successful FBI agent. But after relocating to the Bureau's Pikeville office, things began to change. At this time, Carl Edwards Lockhart, a notorious bank robber, had just been let out of prison, and Putnam believed that he was back to his old ways. So he began gathering informants that could help him take down Lockhart. One of these informants was Susan Smith, drug-addicted divorcee raising a family who needed the cash. But soon, she became more than just Putnam's informant. The two began an affair, and by 1989, Smith was allegedly pregnant. This terrified Putnam. He knew it would not only ruin his marriage, but end his career, and so he demanded a paternity test and explained he and his wife could adopt from her. This, however, led to a violent fight between them that ultimately ended with Putnam strangling Susan to death. Initially, the suspect was Susan's ex-husband, but soon Putnam was interrogated, and after failing a polygraph, he confessed to the whole thing and offered to lead the FBI to where she was. However, there are a few mysteries. Susan Smith's sister claimed that FBI agent Ron Poole, Putnam's superior, not only knew about Smith's alleged pregnancy, but also disclosed to Smith information about Putnam's illicit activities with other informants. And allegedly, medical examiners claimed that they were unable to find any trace of a fetus during an autopsy on Smith, who should have been 4 months pregnant. I mean, it's just all disturbing top to bottom. And last up in our number 1 spot, the Brianna Dennison case. Brianna Dennison was a college student home for the holidays in Reno, Nevada, when tragically one night she went missing while staying over at a friend's house. In the days following, the Reno Police Department conducted an investigation at her friend's home where she had last been seen and concluded she had been abducted after discovering male DNA on a doorknob and her own on a pillowcase. At this point, the FBI became involved in the search, and after investigations linked the male DNA to other open cases involving sexually violent crimes, they worried that the missing girl's fate had already been decided. And sadly, nearly a month after she had gone missing, Brianna was found dead in a ditch. That fall, after lengthy investigations, interrogations, and DNA samples, they finally found the man guilty of the crime, James Biella. And it came out that he had actually held her captive in his home for several days, harming and doing awful things to her body before he eventually killed her. And to top it off, he lived 1 block from FBI agents, 2 sheriffs, and a local police officer. So he was literally doing it all under their nose.
Skidmore, Missouri is a very small town with a very big, dark secret, and it's not just one family's secret, it's the entire town's. This is the case of Ken Rex McElroy, the boogeyman of Skidmore, whose story almost plays out like a real-life version of Nightmare on Elm Street. So back in the 60s and 70s, Skidmore was ruled by a man named Ken McElroy, who is infamous for being a total bully and a criminal. He pretty much ran the town, and for over 2 decades, He reigned over it like a mad dictator. He'd steal from local farmers and businesses, commit violence on townsfolk at will, and engaged in all sorts of other criminal behavior. He also had multiple wives, many of whom he'd just taken unwillingly. With the help of a mob-connected lawyer, McElroy was virtually untouchable, intimidating anyone who dared to press charges. He would stalk people, kill people's pets, burn homes and businesses to the ground in order to maintain his grip on the town. By July of 1981, though, people had had enough. A mob of fed-up locals who'd endured years of his terror surrounded him in the center of town and opened fire. McElroy was shot dead, but not one of the more than 50 witnesses came forward to identify who pulled the trigger, and no one was ever arrested. To this day, every single witness has refused to talk, and the case remains unsolved.
Diane Stout lost her husband and her son and witnessed her daughter grow incredibly ill in the span of just 1 year. Her husband passed without warning, seemingly of natural causes. Her son died of what seemed to be seizure-related complications, and one of her daughters, Sarah, was rushed to hospital requiring emergency attention for flu-like symptoms that later revealed themselves to be the result of organ failure. While one might think Diane to have been crushed by this dark series of unfortunate events, many were surprised and deeply disturbed to notice how cheerful she remained throughout the entirety of each ordeal. At the funeral of both her husband and her son, she seemed pretty unmoved and, as I said to some, almost happy. When her daughter almost lost her life to organ failure, Diane spent the majority of her time in the hospital making jokes about going on vacation. All of this strange behavior eventually led people to suspect that the deaths and illnesses that occurred in the family were no mere fluke of nature, but rather the doing of Diane herself. It turns out Diane had actually been conspiring with her other daughter Rachel to kill off the rest of the family one by one until only the two of them remained. For their crimes, both women were sentenced to life behind bars.
This next story comes to us from a now deleted Reddit user, and if this is true, it's absolutely nuts. So it goes like this. My uncle was working near Vancouver on a farm. He had been working there for a while, while my dad worked on a different farm not too far away. Well, the guy my uncle worked for had a bunch of pigs and would often have pig roasts and invite a bunch of people over. He would also sell the pork to people in nearby towns. While at the same time, a bunch of women were going missing. After a while, my uncle left and didn't speak to the man again. Turns out, the farmer had killed 49 women and fed them to his pigs. He'd also mixed them with the pork that he sold. So basically, my uncle and many people were unknowingly eating people. End of post. So there was a very real case where this happened. Robert Pickton's the man. We've talked about him before on the channel. One of the most disgusting serial killers in history. So if this Redditor's story is true, his uncle knew the guy, and not only that, he may have eaten human remains on more than one occasion. That is crazy.
The first time Charlie Brandt ever claimed a life was in January of 1971. He was young and filled with rage. In a fit of violence, he claimed the life of his mother and attempted to claim the life of his father by firing a weapon at both of them multiple times. He would have taken the life of his sister too, but his weapon jammed and she was able to fight him off. While you'd think this would be the end of the story, it unfortunately isn't. Because of Charlie Brandt's age, prosecutors declined to charge him, and eventually he, his father, and his sister just decided to put the incident behind them, which is probably the dumbest thing I've heard all year, and they went about their lives like nothing had happened. In 2004, Brandt and his wife Terry were staying with Terry's niece Michelle in Orlando, which is when, in an act of unprovoked violence, Brandt impaled his wife several times in the chest before moving on to attack Michelle. After he was satisfied and positive that both Terry and Michelle were dead, he took his own life. After his death, police linked Brandt to the 1989 killing of a woman named Sherry Paricio, and while he has not yet been linked to the death of any others, police are incredibly inclined to believe that Brandt's hit list is a lot longer in real life than it is on paper.
Fred and Rose West were a British couple who, on the surface, seemed like any other suburban family. I mean, looking at this photo, would you ever think they were responsible for a string of heinous, sickening, disturbing crimes? Fred, maybe, he kind of has that sinister grin, but Rose, she looks like a sweet librarian or a school teacher. But in this case, she was just as involved in the crimes as her husband was. Behind their seemingly normal public image was a house of horrors, and the couple would begin being investigated in 1992. Neighbors and friends saw them as an average couple, raising their family, running a business. To the outside world, they were just another hard-working family, but the reality was far more sinister. The Wests were involved in a series of horrific crimes, including the killings of several young women who would endure horrendous torment beforehand, and they'd hide their remains in the cellar or the garden. In 1994, police were investigating the disappearance of their daughter, Heather. What police were not expecting to find were numerous bodies buried around their property. The couple were arrested and charged. Fred took his own life in 1995, and Rose is still rotting away in prison where she belongs.
In 1893, John List, a former military man, moved into a massive mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, accompanied by his mother, his wife Helen, their daughter Patricia, and their sons Frederick and John Jr. For a while, they lived happily, but by November of 1971, things had taken a serious turn for the worst. John, who had already been experiencing some pretty severe financial difficulties, lost his job, and he snapped. While his daughter and sons were out of the house, he took the life of his mother and his wife. When his daughter Patricia and his son Frederick arrived home, he took their lives too. And then he stopped to make some lunch. After finishing up in the kitchen, he drove away from his home, picked up his remaining son John Jr., took him back to the home, and as you can probably guess, took his life too. After that, he placed the bodies of his wife, his daughter, and his two sons in sleeping bags in the mansion's ballroom. He left his mother in her room in the attic, and then he skipped town. In 1989, John remarried, and in 1990, he confessed to his crime, saying that he had only killed his family because he believed it was better to send them to heaven rather than have them share in his financial hardships, a sentiment shared by absolutely no one. For his crimes, John List was given 5 consecutive life sentences, although in the end, he only spent about 18 years in prison, the same number of years it took to catch him, because he died in his cell on March 21st of 2008 at the age of 82.
The Monniers were a very wealthy family living in Poitiers, France. They were of noble origin, they were well respected and happy. But in 1876, everything changed. Louise Monnier's daughter, Blanche, had gone missing. She and Blanche's older brother, Marcel, were incredibly worried. None of her friends knew where she was. She never left a note. It was as if she'd just vanished into thin air. 25 years passed, and then there was no sign of Blanche, and Marcel and Louise had more or less accepted that they'd never see her again. In May of 1901, the Paris Attorney General received an anonymous letter, though, reading, "Monsieur Attorney General, I have the honor to inform you of an exceptionally serious occurrence. I speak of a spinster who is locked up in Madame Monnier's house, half-starved and living on a putrid litter for the past 25 years. In a word, in her own filth." When police went to investigate, what they found was, shockingly, exactly what was detailed in the letter. An emaciated woman locked up in a small room where she'd been for the last 25 years. Blanche Monnier. She'd been locked away by her very own mother, and Marcel knew about it as well. But why? Well, it was all because Blanche had wanted to marry a man that the rest of the family didn't approve of.
In our number 5 spot today, we have The Trip. This rumored lost episode is a bit of a light-hearted break in some of these extremely dark stories we've been talking about. This episode is said to have been one where Barney had a bit of a slip-up accidentally. Playing the role of Barney probably isn't an easy one. You have to be perpetually joyful while moving and dancing around in a giant purple dinosaur costume, and I'm sure the job can be frustrating at times. This all leads up to one day while filming, the actor playing Barney was having a particularly difficult day, personally and professionally. Of course, the show must go on, so he suits up, starts the show as per usual. Everything is going fine, but on this day, a member of the set team hadn't quite run some of the lines through the set properly. And what I mean by this is that there were some cords that were on the floor, and they weren't taped down properly or marked, which becomes quite a tripping hazard. If you've worked as a performer before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This all leads to one moment in the show when everything has been going smoothly. Barney is in character and moving around the set, but he gets next to the area with the untaped wires, and it causes him to trip. In an act of frustration and probably a little terror, as, well, I mean, tripping in full dinosaur costume isn't exactly ideal, this man on live television lets out a series of expletives as he falls, right in front of everyone on set and the thousands watching at home. Safe to say the episode that day was cut short and definitely never aired again. In our number 4 spot today, we have the DVD. This story starts off with someone going to the store to buy a DVD, which is so funny to me because that immediately just dates this story. How weird is that? Anyway, as they found their DVD and were about to head to pay, they accidentally stepped on something and heard a cracking sound. When they looked down, they realized that they had stepped on a DVD case of a Barney and Friends. This DVD had 6 episodes on it, and when they picked it up and examined it, they decided that maybe this was just meant to be, so they bought it. They didn't use this DVD right away, however. I mean, it was a bit of a last-minute impulsive purchase, but when the time did come, they put the DVD into the player, and nothing happened. They took it out of the player and looked at it to see if there was damage or if it needed a quick cleaning, but they found nothing, so once again they put it back into the machine, and this time it started. The menu pops up first, and when it did, something seemed off. There weren't many options and there was no music playing, but hey, that's not too bad. They hit play on the first episode, and it starts off with Barney sitting on a bench looking sad. He sat there in silence for quite a while before he finally spoke. "Nobody loves me anymore. I will teach them a lesson," he said, before looking directly into the camera and smiling a horrifying smile. Suddenly, someone begins walking down the road near Barney. As they pass him, Barney jumps up and scares him before grabbing him by the leg and pulling him. He pulls so hard that his entire leg comes off. Barney grabbed the other leg and kept dragging him back off the road into the bushes beside it. From here, the most gruesome things happen that I certainly cannot go into detail about, but it's safe to say that Barney had taken the life of this person. The person watching the DVD was of course absolutely horrified at what they had just watched, scared of what would happen next, so they immediately got the disc out of the player. They took the disc outside, smashed it with a baseball bat as much as they could, and then threw it into the woods. They were plagued with nightmares for weeks after, and they finished off their story with this harrowing message. Quote, "If you ever find a copy of it, never ever view it. Try to burn it or smash it if you can. If you view it, those horrible nightmares come flooding in." In our number 3 spot today, we have The Friends. There is rumored to be a lost episode of Barney that has a part where all of the friends in the episode turn on him. What usually is a fun, loving time with lots of learning quickly turns horrendous, but not for the reasons I would have expected. Barney's kind of freaky, like I mentioned at the beginning. He's a little creepy, and if something went wrong on this show, I always expected that it would be Barney that went haywire. But in this lost episode, the roles were really reversed. It isn't quite clear exactly what Barney did, but suddenly everyone just decides that they've had it with putting up with him. It starts with one friend, but suddenly everyone starts joining in and everything erupts into chaos. There is yelling, there is fighting, people are getting hurt, the set is being destroyed, and then suddenly everything just goes blank and the episode was cut short. This episode is said to have only aired once, and the screen going blank was because the network playing it had cut it off due to the violence. This means that no one knows how the episode ends or what happens. Did everyone kiss and make up? Was there a gruesome, gory ending? And how did this episode make it to air in the first place? No one, except for the person who made it, knows the answers to any of these questions, and we're all just left to speculate. In our number 2 spot today, we have The Theory. Rather than a lost episode, this is more like a horrifying Barney theory, and basically it suggests that either the person who plays Barney in the costume is stuck in there and can never come out, or that Barney actually has no one in there. He's just a real sentient creature that is stuck doing this show over and over again. In both of these scenarios, Barney is being held against his will and forced into doing this work, and should he not deliver a happy, joy-inducing performance, he will be subjected to horrible punishments as a result. It's a terrible and terrifying theory, but since I first heard it, I can't stop thinking about it. Whether you believe it or not, it definitely adds an eerie layer to any episode, because it will always linger in the back of your mind. What if? In our number 1 spot today, we have The Real Dinosaur. There are rumors of an episode that exists, and I'm gonna be honest, no one is really sure exactly what happened happens in this episode, but it doesn't even matter because there is one thing that no one who has seen this episode will ever forget. In the episode, Barney, the purple dinosaur, at some point turns into a very real, very terrifying, and very hungry dinosaur. Yep, goodbye songs and hugs, hello gigantic growls, and people running for their lives. All anyone who has seen this episode can remember is that while everyone quickly runs away, not everyone can escape the wrath of Barney, the real dinosaur. The episode featured gruesome carnage, and Barney tore his way through everyone and everything that he could. In the end, however, the episode gets even darker because Barney turns back into his regular, loving self and now has to face the consequences of what he did while he was in this monster form. It isn't clear exactly how this transformation happened, but it is clear that everyone involved and everyone who saw this episode still lives with the trauma today.
And at our number 5 spot, we have the piles of gas masks. So famously, there's one specific room in one of the schools in Pripyat where the floor is filled with gas masks. Looters had come in and taken the small amounts of silver in the mask filters. The presence of gas masks is obviously not a good sign. Doesn't make for a very happy sight. Looks more like the apocalypse hit, which is probably what it felt like for the residents of the city that day, especially the youngsters. They must have been scared out of their minds. What's also odd is that these gas masks weren't used. You'd think they would have been. Apparently just a week before the incident, students were trained on how to use them in case of an emergency, but after the incident took place and everyone was being evacuated, people were instructed not to use the masks because the Communist Party leadership thought the use of them would cause people to panic. Basically, they wanted to save face and not blow the issue out of proportion. You know, the worst nuclear disaster in history. Next up, we have the Chernobyl exclusion zone sign. This sign is straightforward yet crucial. Placed at the boundaries of the zone, it's a worn out marker, weathered by time, warning anyone who approaches. The sign features the distinct trefoil radiation symbol, an unmistakable sign of the danger that lies beyond, marking the edge between safety and risk. The sign is surrounded by rusted gates and crumbling walls, signifying the transition from the familiar to the forbidden, signaling the presence of invisible threats from the nuclear catastrophe that took place back in '86. The exclusion zone sign is a tangible reminder that the invisible dangers of radiation are still very much present. It marks a boundary that, if crossed without caution, could lead to exposure to radioactive contaminants. It's a no-nonsense marker in a place where the consequences of nuclear disaster are still very real, but people jump over all the time, apparently, like graffiti and stuff inside the area. That I wouldn't do it personally, but hey, live your lives. Next on the list are the Chernobyl Pripyat river boats. Eerie as hell. So these boats were once the lifeblood of Pripyat, but when the reactor went kaboom in '86, everything changed. The whole area got evacuated, leaving these boats stranded and forgotten. Rusted metal, broken windows, and a thick layer of dust. These boats haven't moved in decades, just sitting there like ghost ships on a stagnant river. Nature's creeping in, moss, weeds, and who knows what else. The radiation factor amps up the creepiness. These boats were exposed to the fallout, soaking it up like a sponge. No creaking of the boat against the dock, no hum of engines, just eerie stillness. Then there's the knowledge that Pripyat was a lively place once. Families lived there, kids played by the river. Now it's just a desolate wasteland. Number 2, the dolls. Within a deserted kindergarten of Pripyat, the floor is scattered with the haunting remnants of childhood abandoned dolls left behind by evacuated youngsters. Their lifeless eyes stare into the emptiness of a room that once echoed with laughter and play. The dolls, which are now weathered and disheveled, sit frozen in time. Some left in the exact same places where they were left in the middle of play all those years back. And what makes the presence of these dolls so somber is that the residents were told that the evacuation was going to be temporary. So in this abrupt evacuation, children left these toys behind thinking they'd be back soon to get them. But of course, as we all know, they never returned. One of the saddest displays is a set of 4 dolls positioned for a tea party, left sitting in place ever since that fateful day in '86. And we gotta finish things off with all the icky animal mutations. Now, this is actually true. This is not in the realm of cryptozoology. There have been animals found within the area that have some unusual mutations. You have rodents with peculiar physical deformities, ranging from extra limbs to abnormal growths. In some cases, the effects extend to changes in the color of their fur. Birds have also shown signs of the radiation's influence. Some have beak malformations, and even their mating practices have been shown to be off. And you can only imagine how messed up some of the fish are. In the Pripyat River, fish have abnormalities like altered spinal structures and asymmetrical body growth because they're living in radioactive water. What's kind of interesting though is that, sure, there are a bunch of mutations, but the exclusion zone has kind of become a haven for some wildlife because there's no human interference, or at least very, very little. So some species have thrived in this absence of human activity. Nature is incredibly resilient. Route 2A in Maine is said to be one of the most haunted stretches of road in all of the US. Not only do you have loads of ghost stories, but it really is a pretty dangerous road. Lots of deadly accidents have happened here, especially in the winter, where the conditions are said to be absolutely brutal. Tons of sharp turns and blind corners, so it's a pretty notorious road as is. One of the most famous ghost stories is the Screaming Woman. A number of travelers driving along the road at night will report spotting a woman screaming by the side of the road, desperate for help, saying that her husband is trapped in a car wreck. So she asks to be driven further up the road where the accident is, but somewhere along the journey, the woman disappears. The story goes that one winter night, a newly married couple was driving along the road when they swerved and hit a utility pole. The husband was killed instantly, but the woman was thrown from the vehicle. She limped along the road for a while in search of help, but there were no other vehicles. Eventually, she collapsed and died from the cold.
Zombie Road. The most haunted road in Missouri, located in Willwood, Missouri, just west of St. Louis, if you know it. Today, Zombie Road is not so much a road as it is a series of trails, but at one point it was a road, and that is why it is on this list today. Zombie Road was originally constructed in the 19th century, but it was shut down in 2010 to be repurposed as a bike path. Big mistake. Prior to the road being converted into a trail, Zombie Road is rumored to have been home to a crazed killer who escaped from a nearby asylum during the 1950s. He lived out the rest of his days hiding in shacks around the road and preying on young men and women who were unfortunate enough to have been walking around the area. Eventually he died, but unfortunately, according to legend, that didn't stop his reign of terror, because it is believed that the crazed man went on to continue his killing spree in the afterlife, which is how the road came to be known as Zombie Road. When the road was converted to trails, it seems as though the spirit of the man, along with the spirits of his victims, became quite pissed off, because instances of paranormal activity in the area became so bad that city officials were forced to create strict hours of operation for the trail that forbid entry after dark. If you've been, let me know.
A name like Shades of Death Road doesn't really inspire a whole lot of confidence now, does it? At least not in your safety. This road in New Jersey is said to be one of the most haunted places in the entire state. Even before motorized vehicles were a thing, this place had a dark reputation. There were some very violent incidents that took place along here. In the 1920s and 30s, there were some pretty famous incidents. The creepiest, though, is probably the woman who lobbed off her husband's head and then buried both parts of his body on either side of the road. Just off the road is a pretty famous lake too, Ghost Lake, which gets its name for a pretty obvious reason. Spooky stuff happens there. Oh, and there's ghosts. Apparently there's often said to be an eerie fog surrounding the lake, and the sky is perpetually bright, even in the middle of the night, almost like it's always twilight.
What better name is there for a haunted road than Mount Misery? But wait, there's more, because Mount Misery is actually part of a set of two haunted highways, Mount Misery Road and Sweet Hollow Road, that neighbor one another and share in an incredibly ominous and haunted past. According to legend, a woman named Mary killed her husband and their daughters while driving down Mount Misery one night, and then, unable to live with what she had done, she took her own life while driving down Sweet Hollow Road. Many people who have driven down the roads at night have claimed to have seen a police officer flagging them down, as he would have done to Mary after she killed her family. Now, when these people get closer to the officer, they realize that the man is actually missing the back of his head. It's a gruesome sight, and at that point they drive away. Also, others claim that at one time the road was connected to the entrance of an insane asylum, which was burned to the ground one night by an angry patient, and that if you listen closely while driving down the road in the dead of night, you can still hear the dying patient's fiery screams. That sounds like hell.
And finally, we have Highway 299 in California. This one passes by a ghost town, so that, along with other ghostly tales, and it's no surprise why it's said to be one of the most haunted roads in the country. Highway 299 is a long, lonely road running from east to west through the state of California, known for its eerie ghost stories. The most haunted part is said to be between Old Shasta City and Whiskey Town Lake. Old Shasta City was, at one time, a lively gold rush town, but it's now abandoned. All that remains of it now are the ruins of the old bakery, the blacksmith shop, Mason's Lodge, and courthouse. Inside the courthouse, there is an old jail where it's said the spirits of criminals who were tried and hanged still lurk around. And further up the road is Whiskey Town. And Whiskey Town is super interesting because there's an entire town submerged under a lake. When the Whiskey Town Dam was built decades ago, the town flooded and its residents had to leave. But some believe that not everyone left, and the spirits of the people who once lived in the town now haunt the lake. And even if they're not haunting it, just swimming where there's an entire old abandoned town below you, that's weird. Hope you've enjoyed driving down this haunted road with us today.
Stay safe.
Want to see more videos like this one? Check out this video next. It's about mysterious creatures that defy explanation. Scientists are working tirelessly to find out what these creatures are. Hopefully we can get more information as time goes, but watch the video for yourself to see these animals firsthand. What are you waiting for? Click the video now.